Hi guys, in this video we're going to make a cake of Nick Wilde. So we're just going to do his head. So I've just got a 6-inch cake. This one's just a Victoria sponge, but you can use whatever cake you like. And you want to add some buttercream to the middle. Now make sure you whisk it up nice and soft. I haven't whisked mine up quite enough, so it's a bit firm when I'm spreading it in. Now looking at the shape of his head, it's quite rounded at the top and not as rounded at the bottom. So we're going to cut a little bit off the bottom of his face. So cut at a bit of an angle so it comes down in a point. And then I'll just take the edge off the cake, and my cake's starting to crumble a little bit. If yours is a bit like mine and it's a bit crumbly when you're trying to cut it, just stick it in the freezer for 10-15 minutes just to firm it up a little bit. I'm just marking on where I think his eyes are going to come to, and I'm going to try and take out a little triangle so that we'll have a bit of an indentation for where we can add his eyes. And I'm just taking a little bit off those top edges, so I haven't cut it all the way down to the bottom. It's just sort of the top edge where his ears are that I've sort of put that. And again, we're just going to cover the cake in buttercream. Again, mine's a little bit soft, so I've stuck it back in the freezer because I was having a bit of difficulty with it. So you can see now it's been in the freezer for 10 minutes. It has hardened up quite a bit on the edges, so I can put the buttercream on a bit easier without my cake falling apart. Now I've got my little offcuts from when I cut the bottom of his face off. And I'm just going to use these to create a nose, so I'll stick them together in like a bit of a triangle, and we'll push this on where his nose would be, and again we'll just cover that in buttercream. Okay, so his nose is quite big on mine, and we'll pop him to one side. And I've got some pretty coloured icing for this, so I've got some orange that's ready dyed, just saves me doing it myself. And I'm just going to roll this out, so make sure it's rolled so it's plenty big enough to go over the cake. Now bear in mind that actually quite a bit goes over the nose, so it probably wants to be a little bit bigger than you think. And we're just going to gently push that on all the way around. Careful not to get in any creases, and sort of give it a good push down where you put those eye sockets so that we can see the dint from the eyes. And then we'll cut off or trim off all the excess, and of course you can clean up all that buttercream off your board as well. And I'm just pressing his nose a little bit because it's a bit more rounded than I want, so just press it either side. And then just to give a bit more definition to the eye sockets, I'm pushing in with a balling tool. I've pushed a bit hard, so it's gone through to the buttercream, but I'm not too worried at this point because we've got to add his eyes over the top of that anyway. A little pinch at either side where his jawbone is, and I'm going to trim out his eyes so I just get a rough idea of the size of them, so I can see if my eye socket is big enough. And I'll just run around with the tool, marking it on. And again, just go back over that balling tool, making sure we made the eye socket large enough for the eye to go in. I've dyed a small bit of fondant in a Cornish cream colour now, only a small amount, and we're going to roll out a strip that's going to go on the bottom of his face. Now, I haven't worried about trimming the edge. You can see it's sort of cracked a little bit where I've rolled it, but because we're going to add fur lines through all this, those cracks will disappear, so I'm not going to worry about them too much. So you can see underneath, I'm just sort of pushing it off with my modelling tool. Again, it's a bit of a scruffy edge, but that's fine because it's got to look like two different sort of colours that are going to be shading into each other. And I'm just using the bottom edge of my tool to sort of rub that about a little bit more. Again, almost making the edge quite untidy. And we're going to pop a little line in where his nose is, down the centre. And then we're going to go across either side for his mouth and bring it right down the side of the nose to the cheeks. If it looks a bit fat, just push it in a little bit with your fingers. And again, just turning the modelling tool around using the other end, or even just with your finger, to just put a bit more of a dint at either sort of side of his smile. So now the bit that I think makes it look like, or a bit more like who it's meant to be, is adding the fur. So I'm just using the pointy end of my modelling tool, and I'm literally just putting lines all over the face. Larger lines around the edges and much shorter ones sort of around the nose and eye area. So I've got a selection of powdered colours, and these are all edible ones that we're going to add a bit of shading with. So I'm starting with a bit of black that's sort of going just inside that eye socket. Now, it won't look as dark as this when we have added the eyes. And I've also got a bit of an aubergine and a brown that I'm mixing in. And again, just go with a bit of the black around the nose and the mouth area, mainly concentrated in the centre of that mouth. And I've got this colour now that I'm using is called Skin Tone, and it's a bit of an orangey brown, and we're just sort of rubbing that over the edges of the cream where it meets the orange. Then I've just got some of that pre-coloured black for the nose, so start with a bit of a ball and we're kind of pointing it a little bit, and we'll push that in place just on the end of his nose. So if I turn that to the side, you can see it's quite long as his nose because of the point we've put on. And just push it in with your modelling tool, just a tiny line, and then the wider end again, I'm just pushing in 2 nostrils, and I'm just brightening up his nose again with a bit of the aubergine colour, because on some of the pictures it has a slightly purpley tint. And then we've got a bit of white that's just going to go along that very edge, so it looks like the light reflecting off his nose. Now, he still looks a bit scruffy at the moment, but when we add these eyes, it's going to make all the difference. So, start with white fondant, and you're going to create a shape that matches those little paper cutouts that you've got. So you'll see they're not completely flat, they're still quite rounded, and you're just going to push those in the eye sockets. So I'm going to cut off the eyelids now for my paper ones, just so I can see how big they need to be. Hold that against the eye, and we'll mark that on there with the modelling tool. Same for each one. I've got a round plunger cutter, quite a largish one, and I'm going to push this in where I want the eyes to be looking. And I've got party green food colouring that I'm just going to paint in. This is just one of the gel colours, and anything that I use in the video I will put in the description box below the video with where you can get it from. So I've got a smaller plunger cutter now. We've rolled out some black fondant, and we're going to put a smaller circle in the centre of each of those green bits of the eye, and a tiny ball of white fondant to just give us a little light spot in each eye, like that. So cut out my eyelids, roll thin some of the orange that you had left from the face, and just trim around that sort of paper template you've got, and then we're going to push that onto the eye. Just tuck any bits in that you need to with a modelling tool, and the eyelid makes quite a big difference to what it looks like. So we're going to start with shading them again now. So you're going to darken the edges and the bottom sort of area of the eyelids, leaving the top bits a bit lighter looking. So you can use a bit of black and also a bit of aubergine. Just don't be too heavy-handed with the black. And I've got some black fondant that we're just going to roll into a long sort of snake shape, and that's going to cover the join of the eyelid where it goes onto the eye. Okay, and same with the other one. And you need some eyebrows, so we'll just use a bit of the black to dust on eyebrows. If you want to stick them on in fondant, you can do. I think I might have gone a little bit heavy-handed with my eyebrows. Now, we're going to use the fondant for the ears, but to thicken it up a little bit, I've added a bit of Tylose powder just mixed in, and I'm keeping them quite thick. And we're going to cut a triangle for each ear. So I'm just checking it for size first, and then it's a bit big, so I'll trim a bit more off and we'll have another look. Once you've got it to the right size, you want a little bit of your cream. We're just going to push that in the middle, and I haven't worked on it being an exact triangle shape. I've just sort of squidged it in and put lines through it. And then we're going to go back to our black double dusts, and these are going to be dusted down the edges. And then we're going to sort of fold the ear in half and put a little bit on that top sort of corner of the ear as well. And that will go in place there. Make sure you fold over part of the ear at the front, and you can just use a little bit of water to push that on in place. So the back of the ear is actually touching my cake board. So it is resting against something, so it shouldn't fall backwards. If you've lost any of the lines that you put in when you squished it on, just put those back on. And you do exactly the same for the other ear. And that's it. So he's not identical to the actual character in the film, but it's as good as I could get him, I think. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Do be sure to check out my other Zootopia cakes. Thanks for watching.
If you liked this video and would like to see more, please click on the images of the other videos suggested. Also, please do subscribe to my channel using the button at the bottom right hand corner of the screen. You can also visit my cake website and my Facebook page to see more cakes and ideas.